I am incredibly excited to introduce our first speaker up here today. I had the pleasure last night of sitting at the World Family Business Awards, and this gentleman was the winner of our Family Entrepreneur Winner of the Year for 2016. He's a remarkable, remarkable man from a remarkable family. André Hoffmann is the non-executive vice chairman of Roche. He's the senior representative of his family on this organization. And it's one of the biggest pharmaceutical companies and most successful in the world. His grandfather, Fritz Hoffmann LaRoche, started the company in 1986 and had an idea of innovation and globalization. Today, there's more than 90,000 employees in 150 countries. And the company truly has innovated. Of the 100 most impactful patents in the world for pharmaceuticals, according to the World Health Organization, 29 were started at Roche. Think about the impact they've had on the health of the world. It's quite remarkable. And what we talked about last night, and hope we'll get into today a little bit, is how do you balance a family ownership, a family-controlled business as it started, all the way up to being such a large corporation? Because, as he says, and we'll talk about it, what's good for the corporation is always good for the family, but what's good for the family may not always be best for the corporation. And how do you balance that in these types of organizations? He's a remarkable man in business, but he's also a remarkable man in what he works on outside of his company. He is on the World Wildlife Federation. He is very big on sustainability. He talks all about the way business can have a social value in the world. I'm absolutely excited to bring to you André Hoffmann. Please welcome him to the stage. There he is. Welcome.
Thank you.
All right. So I'm going to ask some questions up front. Then we're going to open it up and let you all ask some questions. So please be thinking of them as we start along here. So first of all, André, congratulations on your award last night. It was a wonderful dinner and a great recognition for you.
Well, thank you very much to Ernst & Young to have given me this award. I'm not quite sure I deserve it, but I'm really grateful to have received it.
Well, if anyone has heard what people said about you last night, you're very, very deserving. So let me start, though. So you come into a situation where you had generations of your family working in this big, incredibly successful organization, and you've got to decide your way in the world. So how did you start when you were young? Did you decide right away you wanted to come work for Roche, or did you decide that you might want to go off on your own? How did you start off?
Well, actually, it was a bit of an unusual start. My father is a zoologist, and his passion is wetlands. His passion is birds, wildfowl, wetlands. I grew up literally in a swamp in the south of France, in the Camargue. No contact with the business other than, of course, the absolute permanent presence of the business around the breakfast table, around the dinner table. We talked about it a lot, but I had no physical contact with the company until I was much later in age, I mean, sort of 16, 17. Then I moved to Switzerland, and that's when I started to realize that what I always envisaged was an interesting business was, in fact, a very important business. And that's how I decided to go a little bit deeper into my relationship with the business. That's how I decided that I needed to gather some experience outside of the company. So I went to a business school. I went to work in the city in London, did 10 years as a stockbroker, then went to get an MBA at INSEAD in Fontainebleau, and eventually joined the family business at board level as a board member 20 years ago for our 100th anniversary.
And it is remarkable because in an interview you had, I'm not sure exactly how long ago it was, for the Financial Times.
Yeah.
You said when you got your MBA at INSEAD, you went off and you realized family businesses, you had a different point of view about them. How did it change over time?
Well, this is a very interesting point. When I started taking classes at INSEAD, people used to tell me, look, you guys, you own the business, it's very nice, but you are in the way. You know, you're stopping shareholder value to be accrued to the business. So get out of the way, you're obsolete, replace all your management by perfectly trained MBAs, preferably trained at INSEAD, and we will make sure that we will increase the share price so everybody will be happy. So at the time, really, this idea of trying to think long term was counterbalanced by the fact that you needed to have an impact on the business quickly. Now, since then, we had two serious crises, one that nearly took away most of the business purpose, in fact. So, and I don't mean just in the pharmaceutical business, I mean collectively. The 2008 crisis was a very serious one. And so today there is again a premium on stability, there is a premium on long-term thinking, there is a premium on long-term growth and value generation. And so that has helped us a lot to regain our legitimacy as long-term owners.
So it's really interesting, André, to hear you as the vice chairman of a large company talk about long-term thinking when more and more we're pushed to quarterly earnings, we're pushed to activism, we're pushed to analysts that look month to month or social media day to day about how a company's doing. You know, the first video that we saw was about legacy and what's the difference we're going to leave in the world. And you know, I would say we saw some great thinkers in that legacy film. Around this room, I'm hopeful that we'll have films in the future. Many of you will be in that type of film. What do you think about when you think about legacy and Roche and your family and what they're doing?
Well, you have to separate that in two ways. I mean, there's this, what I just spoke about, the long-term ownership. How do you construct a company that has certain values? How do you personify a major corporation which have a tendency of being a little bit gray and faceless? How do you give it a personality? I think that's something since my great-grandfather Fritz, we succeeded in doing. You know, there's always been a family behind, and I think that's the important thing. Then on the other side, there's the contribution to the pharmaceutical industry. You mentioned the 29 essential medicines as defined by the WHO. I could also say that in a research-driven organization, you need to go into rather long cycles. It takes about 15 years from the discovery of a molecules to bringing it to market. We've been able to compress that a little bit for a number of reasons, and so have our competitors. I mean, technology has helped there. But in the long term, you need to be able to think at the moment of discovery about how you're going to commercialize. And that creates, in German, we would say you need a long breath if you want to go there. And that's what we're trying to bring. So our legacy, I think, would be that stability, long-term thinking, and ability at translating what's happening in the lab to the patient.
So it's really interesting. So you think about how important today in the global economy this long-term thinking is. And there was a breakfast this morning, many of you may have been at our EY Beacon Institute on purpose, and how important I think personally, and more leaders are talking about purpose as a driving force for business. Why do we exist as an entity? Why do our employees come to work every day? Why here as opposed to somewhere else? And your purpose is doing now what patients need next. And it's a remarkable purpose when you think about it. Tell me about how important that is to you and to your 90,000 employees around the world. It's hard to get purpose driven down to the roots of an organization. How important is that, and what do you do about it?
Sure. First, just coming back to this notion of time, you're having tomorrow a speech by Paul Polman. Paul was one of the first who actually said, you know, I don't want to give you quarterly estimates. I don't want to give you guidance. You know, you work it out. We're doing the right thing. In the long term, we will create value. And so seeing people like him moving in fast-moving consumer goods, talking the same language as discovery-led companies, I think that was a sign of reassurance for us. I think that helped us a lot.
And he was punished for that in the marketplace when he first did it, and now he's rewarded for it. Yeah.
He did, absolutely. And I think that's a cost you have to take into account. If you really want to do the right thing, you need to be able to think long-term. We think in the next generation, not in the next quarter, and I think that makes a difference. But how do you give a sense of purpose to all employees and to all stakeholders? Because we're not only talking about the employees, we're talking about the people working in hospitals, we're talking about the payers of our products, in other words, insurance companies, states, health systems. We are a large community, and if we really want to, and also a very competitive community, because of course pharmaceutical is a very profitable business as we need to invest so much into research. So there is a lot of competition for each of these pathologies. If you really want to be able to drive an advantage to our company, you need this personification. And I make it quite clear to as many people as possible that the reason we are in that business is not because we want the company to make a profit, but because we want to bring a benefit to patients. The patient is central to what we do, and we want people to be passionate about that in the company, and we talk about this quite openly. This is not a question of hiding behind a fig leaf. We want results, and we want results in the benefit of the patient. So doing today what the patient needs tomorrow or needs next is about patients. And I think that's the beauty of the pharmaceutical industry. You are actually bringing health to people. You are making people better.
So you mentioned this whole concept of thinking beyond just profit, and the term that's often used is inclusive capitalism, and it's talking about making all of your stakeholders better off. And this is really taking up around the world. Lady Lynn Rothschild in the UK is doing it. You have the B corporations that Virgin is leading. You have a whole bunch of these popping up. And it talks about stakeholders such as your employees. You have 90,000 plus employees who have a big impact on the world. How do you get them, how do you build purpose authentically into what you're doing so it's not just a tagline?
Well, you need to make sure that people who work for the corporation and people who are in contact with it understand that your purpose is sincere. This is not just, dare I say it, consultant speak. It's actually a felt emotion. And then the fact that there is a family, the fact that there are 7 shareholders overseeing what is happening is a help. You know, you talk to an individual, you don't talk to a corporation. I think that makes a difference. The people who do not recognize that they are in that business because they want to make a difference should be working for somebody else. I mean, it's not really, so practically how do you do it? In the interview process, you bring these values forward. We define these values. We want our people to have courage. We want them to have passion. We want them to be integer, have integrity. We really do try to walk that talk.
Yeah, but you're okay. So take the other point. You're a large corporation and your shareholders want returns. That they're investing in you because they want a return on their money that they put into the company, beyond the family, of course. And, you know, in the United States right now, I won't get you involved and ask you many questions on the election to put you on the spot, but it is basically...
Love to talk about the election if you want to.
I know how you feel about it. We talked in the green room. But, you know, it is really like the government versus business as opposed to government with business. Sure. And your view is that business should have a role in society beyond just profit, as you've stated. How do you think you build this bridge back? How do you start having business play a more constructive role with government, with large and small businesses, so that we all face this problem together?
So, Mark, thank you for addressing that problem. That's one of my biggest work outside of the corporation. I am vice president of the World Wide Fund for Nature. We have now moved away from this obsession with species and places, and we're trying to go into understanding why we need to do something against overexploitation of natural resources. And that means, in my sense, quite clearly, to restore the credibility of businesses, and I mean not only the small businesses, but the big one, the mega corporations, the multinationals, to restore their credibility as net contributor to society. So if you are active in society, you need to be able to contribute to the state of the communities in which you work. You need to be able to make a commitment which goes over and above just the servicing of the patient in our case. And so what does that mean in reality? It means that you deal in an ethical manner at all levels of the value creation chain. You use natural resources in a reasonable manner. You do not over-test on animals, for instance. You create opportunity for patients to have access to your drug, etc., etc. Mm-hmm. I mean, we could go very technical in this, but I think it's important to be changing people's mentality. Corporations are not here just in order to fulfill the purpose of business, which is to make a profit, but they're also there in order to help communities to remain sufficiently stable to be the customers of tomorrow.
So more and more businesses want to do this, but as you know, especially in the U.S., but it's now spreading across the world, this activist shareholderism, where companies are being attacked for not just focusing on share buybacks, dividends, long-term investment, but they're having to focus more on immediate returns. Have you felt that at all at the company with your focus on sustainability and long-term thinking? Have they come after you and said, well, we care more about short-term profits, and if you don't fix that, we're going to go ahead and try and take some shares in your positions in your company? So
maybe I should explain the idiosyncrasies of Roche. We have 2 types of papers on the stock exchange. One is the share, the voting share, of which we have 51%. And the family owns 50.9 something %. And then there is the dividend certificate, which is just a piece of paper which actually allows you to receive the dividend. This represents about 7 times as much as the shares, and so the economic risk is a little bit, there's an asymmetry there. But the paper that is traded, the paper that is available in the stock exchange is the what we call in German the Genussschein, the dividend certificate. And so people who buy our dividend certificate know that they can have two things. They have a stable family majority, which will not be destroyed by consideration as you just described, but they also know that because of that, they have less to say into the way we run the business. So there has to be this trust relationship. If you want to buy and hold Roche shares, you have to accept that we are a unique situation, that we are dominated by my family, and that in the long term has helped to create value because it has allowed us to concentrate on innovation without spending too much time in dealing with just the consideration you mentioned. However, we did have attacks by activists. Not so long ago, our main competitor, Novartis, acquired 33% of our shares. We've so far have, it hasn't changed anything in the way we practice our thing.
Yeah, it's nice to be a controlling shareholder. That's a good situation to be in.
You get my point, yeah.
All right, so let's step back for a moment. Pharmaceutical industry, incredibly important to all of us. We're all going to need your drug someday, whether we like it or not. And so tell us about the disruption. What's going on in the industry to help it get better drugs? We know there's also concern over pricing of drugs and research. And what's your view on all that's going on in the industry?
Yeah, well, that's the debate about the fourth industrial revolution. All this change in technologies, all these new opportunities to better understand what we're doing, all these progresses at gathering and collecting data in a more efficient manner. The pharmaceutical industry is one of the most regulated in the world. The regulators generate more data than you might want to care for. We have to generate just as much data in order to reply to them. Each patient has a medical record and a file which goes back for a long time. All this information still needs to be processed and to be used. We pharmaceutical businesses are not the best people to do this. And so the disruption in our case is that we need to acquire quickly competencies in fields which are not traditional for the pharmaceutical industry. And we're in the process of doing that. And of course, that means partnering. It means working with other people. It means a more open mentality. It means sharing. And that doesn't come naturally to big businesses, as I'm sure you know. So that's for the existing data. But then we have the future, which is this enormous capacity at generating new data. I wear one of these Fitbits. I'm sure some of the people here do the same thing. I'm sending to my doctor information about my heart rate and about my microphone. There are things happening like this on an ongoing basis, and we will see more and more of these data collection points. We were talking this morning about a little pill that you could swallow, which could determine your metabolic rate in a sort of absolute clear manner. All this information, coupled to genomic information, coupled to the gene sequencing technologies, which are now really coming of age, should allow us to identify better targets for improving health. And so in a nutshell, the answer to how do we deal with disruption, we need to stay nimble. Now, how do you get a company with 90,000 employees to be nimble? That's really the challenge. And we're working at that from different angles. One would be collaboration, so partnering, sharing. The other one would be breaking up our internal effort into different research groups, not necessarily doing the same work, but and so therefore sharing platforms, but independent of each other. And just in general, as I said before, keep the patient in the middle. That's what we really want to do.
So you had said, though, I mean, innovation is incredibly important. It's your lifeblood, obviously. You have to have new drugs, and it's certainly important for all of us. So thank you for doing that. You did say, though, that in an INSEAD interview you had a while back, that increasing innovation increased risks as well. What do you mean by that?
Well, if you look at the strategy used by corporations involved in healthcare across the planet, because the industry goes in waves, when you do discover a new technology, you get a maximum benefit of it for a very short period of time because there is this patent before it turns into generic. And so the boom and bust type of model is a traditional model of the pharmaceutical industry. So when you get to the right to the top of the income curve, the temptation is to diversify. So you traditionally would go into ancillary business. I mean, something like vaccine, which have a lower margin but are just as needed in healthcare, generics, ophthalmology, you name it. I mean, there's always a possibility of linking this with the prime purpose of the company. We have gone exactly the other route. We are only interested in discovering new ethical medicine, new medicine that are going to meet unmet medical need. And we've retained just one extra division, which is diagnostics, because the vision we're trying to pursue is this notion of personalized healthcare. We want to be able to understand the patient and diagnostics as much as possible of its of he or she's parameters, so that we can identify the disease they need. Now, in simple terms, that means that every 15 years you bet the house again. And that's what I mean by increasing the risk. Once you are cash rich, you're at the top of the cycle, you can do two things. You can acquire business which have nothing to do with you, or you can merge with a bigger one. Both of these avenues we've decided not to follow because we think they dilute the intensity that we need to apply to our research.
So that's an interesting question. What I was going to ask you about, there's been a lot of M&A activity in the pharmaceutical industry. Now, some of it we know is driven in part by foreign acquisitions of U.S. companies because of the tax laws they called inversions, and some of those have fallen off as the rules have changed. But do you see that as something that's good or bad for the industry over the longer term, the merger and acquisition activity?
Well, there is an inverse correlation between the size of the business and its innovation capacity. And the way already that the structure is, that the society has evolved now is that you have the big pharma companies which are excellent at distribution, penetration, lot of market, very good at regulation, what we call the phase 4, everything that happens after being on the market. So follow-up, distribution, manufacturing, etc. And then you have the discovery, which is the key of our industry, which tends to be in more and more the domain of small startup, of small innovation, a small biotech company who sell themselves to the big company when they have a product that really guarantees the valuation they're seeking. In our case, we are the biggest biotech company in the world. More than 60% of our products are actually biotech products. So this notion of having to get to the innovation is not really as important to that. But we are seeing that big corporations are more and more struggling to fill up this pipeline. And so this pipeline is still the most important differentiation factor in the pharmaceutical industry.
So the pipeline, there's lots of ways you get it. One is you be innovative. You come up with new patents and drugs yourself. The other, and you did do one acquisition back in around 2009 of Genentech, which was a smaller company. What about that? Was that to stay entrepreneurial? What effect did that acquisition have on you and the culture of Roche?
Well, first we have to say that we acquired Genentech, in fact, 25 years ago, at a time when it had just 5 years on the stock exchange. What we did is that we never merged it into our business. We kept it at arm's length and ran it as an independent company. So we owned 60% of it, and we left the 40% of it in the stock exchange in the US. That was a good strategy. It allowed a lot of people within the organization to continue to innovate and to continue to bring new drugs to our pipeline. In fact, 40% of our sales today are all issued from that particular period, monoclonal antibodies to deal with oncology issues. So, yes, we were able to do that. Then, at some stage, the business of that subsidiary became sufficiently big for us to integrate it into the main business, and that's when we acquired the 40% that we didn't acquire originally. And that was an expensive process because the company valuation was very high, and we had to buy out all the minorities. But it was a natural progression as to the consolidation of the sale into the big organization. And it's been very successful. It's now 6 years ago, 7 years ago, and it's contributed a lot to our sales success and to our continuing success in oncology. Now, the biggest danger there was an easy one. How are we going to stop when there's consolidation? Because if you have an arm's length relationship and you have a subsidiary somewhere, you have the board, and this conversation is an easy one. But then suddenly you bring them together, and suddenly you have, Mr. Schmidt in Basel, who is responsible for Mr. Smith in California, and guess what? They don't think the same way, they don't say the same thing. And so what we had to sort of guard against was this sort of the revenge of the middle management, which I caution you about. Yeah? And it worked. I mean, because we were able to talk about values and because we were able to talk about, innovating for the patient. The business purpose of Genentech before was in business for life. Our business purpose before the merger was we innovate healthcare, and we merged that with the patient. You know, we are doing today what the patient needs next. So that's how we did.
So got that. So that was your one big bet over many years. So 25 years ago, brought it fully in 2009 or 10, something like that. But the world, while you stayed large and gotten larger, the world has changed quite a bit for your industry. And we're seeing more and more biotech entrepreneurs pop up everywhere with great ideas. And the question I have is, how does that affect your thinking? What do these biotech entrepreneurs who are coming up in different places mean to you? How do you work with them? What do you learn from them? How, you know, many of them, some of them are in the room as biotech entrepreneurs.
So there again, I'm going to take the trump card from the family control business, which is long-term thinking, stability. I said we have split out our research effort. We now have 3 research groups. We have something we call PRED, which is Pharma Research and Early Development based in Basel with activities in the UK and in Germany. We have something called GRED, Genentech Research and Development based in California. And we have our Japanese subsidiary, which we still hold at arm's length like it was the case with Genentech, called Chugai. But then we have a 4th leg, and that leg is partnering. So we have a team of 100 people constantly scouting the markets, trying to see where is innovation, where are young companies, new ideas that we need to look at. And today it's not biotech anymore. Huh? Today it's more e-tech, e-health, not necessarily new sensors, but just how you use this data, how you analyze it into identifying more suitable targets for our research effort. And so when you are involved into partnering, it is important to offer something to differentiate yourself. So if I am in the market for a new product, a new solution, and I am in competition with 2 or 3 of my majors, I cannot just offer money because that's a little bit of a reductive thing. But I can offer something like, you know, in the next generation, the family is still going to be in control. We are not going to restructure the research department every 5 minutes. Come to us. We are the partner of choice for development. And that argument has helped us, in particular with Genentech. I mean, they would never have sold themselves to an American corporation. But they did do this business with these far distant Swiss people whom they didn't know anyway. So I think that would be my answer. If you want to deal with innovation, you need to have lots of partnership. You need to be able to share. And you need to be able to share. That means creating a certain stability around research workers. When you look at the sales organization, they have targets they need to execute, and you need to be ambitious. You need to be pushing this because you want this medicine to be accessible to as many patients as possible. In research, you know, a little bit of quietness is required, and I think we can provide that.
Wonderful. So I'm going to ask just a couple more questions before I open it up, so please be ready to ask your own questions. And then I'm going to look forward. We talked a lot about you and how you got to where you are. We talked a lot about the industry and the disruption and how you've managed through it. Let me ask you about those entrepreneurs out there. How do they work with, how do they approach, any advice for them about as they scale their business and build, what they should be thinking about, either working with a company like yours or any other way?
Well, in the pharmaceutical industry in particular, the barriers to entry are quite enormous now. We were talking about the regulatory burden before. That's increasing with every day with the increase of technology. Today, the FDA, to quote one agency, would insist on much more data than was the case only 10 years ago. Not only because they want to regulate, but also because the data is now available. So it's getting more and more expensive to produce. So we talk about phase 1 discovery, phase 2 proof of concept, phase 3 entrance into man, phase 4 into the market. And phase 1, phase 2 you can do with relatively little money. Phase 3 it's already very expensive. Phase 4 it's very expensive. So if there is an advice I could give to small businesses is decide early. Do you want to do just development, or do you want to go into the real marketplace? If I look at the likes of Gilead, to name an example, they took early on the decision that they were going to go all the way, and they're now a very successful business. But it meant that their growth was slower. So that would be one trade-off. Now, the other trade-off, of course, is to try to identify what is the next technique that we all need. And there we're all interested to hear.
So if you were looking for 5, 10 years from now, André, where do you see the big changes in the in your industry, in the movement of healthcare products and services?
Well, I'm not sure I have the answer to that, but I can see that we've focused a lot today on innovation and how we discover new products and new solutions. But the other side we need to look at as well is access to medicine. Who can actually get these solutions? How can we make sure that patients are treated with these drugs, not only in our part of the world, but also in the rest of the planet? We also need to make sure that these therapeutic solutions, these drugs, are affordable. Some of these oncology products are getting very expensive for a lot of reasons, which we perhaps don't need to enter into here. But in 5 years' time, I expect the industry to have come up with a more cost-conscious type of answer. Yeah. It cannot be that throwing money at the disease is the only way of curing it. There must be better ways of doing that. The ultimate aim, of course, would be to go away from curing towards preventing and making sure that we understand the diseases better so that we can prevent them to developing. Much easier to deal with somebody before he has diabetes than after he has diabetes. It's just, so that might be a way of regulating costs. I think that's the main change. I mean, how long will society accept to pay for our products if we cannot demonstrate real efficacy? So we're thinking, to answer this, we think in terms of outcomes. Some of our products will be priced differently according to the outcomes that they can offer. So we want to be part of the solution. If you have a drug that works well in a particular therapy, then we will charge it at a higher price than in another therapy where it doesn't work. And I think that's the way it should be.
Great. So my last question, as long as you're making predictions, who will win, Hillary or Donald?
Well, I'm sorry for all of you. I think it's going to be Donald. Tough luck.
All right. Well, with that, we're going to open it up for questions from the audience. So let's, I don't know, it's hard to see with the lights. I don't know if we can turn them up a little.
I can see a thing, yeah.
Let's see if we have any. Is there one in the back over there, I see, and one over here. So do we have a mic runners or where? All right. So there's one back there. Great.
So as you look at the Genentech acquisition, was just great luck, or you had some rigorous standards that you look back and, hey, we did a great job on meeting all these standards and making an acquisition?
Well, we were talking about prediction, now we talk about hindsight, which of course is much easier.
Go with hindsight.
Much easier. I remember the conversation when Genentech was being discussed as a potential acquisition target. We had on the board two scientists, which I will not name, who were supposed to be the guys, on top of research. And they told us, what? You want to acquire a company which is using protein as a therapy? That will never work. It's far too big molecule. You can't do that. And so it was the business people on the board who said, this is an opportunity that we need to explore. This company is showing some true promises. Why don't we give it a try? So it was, in many definitions, it was a punt. And the punt was based on good understanding of sound science and good people, backing the entrepreneur rather than backing the technology. And it paid off. Now, if we were today in the same situation as we were 25 years ago, our criteria would be very different. We would look at it in a totally more objective manner, with much more data, with much more attention to what the thing looks like. There is more information available than ever before, and that makes a difference. But I don't know if that answers your question. It was nose, nose.
All right, where's the mics? We got a couple people over here. Sorry, right here. And then we'll go to the back over there next.
André, it's very obvious that you manage the company very well through good governance structures. How do you manage the family?
Or do you manage the family?
It's a pity. I can't see if they're there or not. So. But yeah, I mean, this is something I mentioned yesterday in my remarks for dinner, and I don't know if I'm repeating that for certain people. But of course, our family has taken the decision some years ago that we would not be executive. So the management of the company per se is done by what you call hired guns, no? I mean, okay, that's one thing. So my main job is to manage the family. That's how I define my success rate. You know, if we are not all together backing what is happening within the company, it becomes very difficult. Now, we're very lucky. We're in the 4th generation, we're just 7. And so that makes it more manageable. We have a rule. We take decisions unanimously. When we get to the AGM, we only have 1 vote for the majority. So we have these conversations in advance. We prepare them. I try to sort of convince them of my point of view, and they sometimes convince me of theirs. And so we do have an exchange, and that would be my simple answer to this. You need to talk. You need to talk, and you need to know each other well enough to anticipate what the question will be. And that's values, and that's how we live, really. Not very convincing answer, but that's the best one I can come up with.
All right, we got back there. We have any?
Thank you for this. I'm glad that you touched the affordability issue. I work as a journalist in Estonia, but I also have established a private cancer treatment charity. So we collect donations to help Estonian people purchasing the vital modern drugs, and we give them life. And the way I understand, pharmaceutical companies always put their profits first. It's not a patient. So you decline to differentiate prices in different countries based on GDP per capita. So in the United States, every new oncological drug is more expensive than $100,000 a year. And even the doctors, they are rioting against pharmaceuticals because they cannot treat their patients. So my question is, what can you really do about that, and whether this is actually a fair business in terms of ethics?
Sure. No, I understand the question. First, maybe just a broad point about the business engine. We generate innovation because we make a profit. And the fact that we make a profit allows us to invest more into research than if we didn't make a profit. So the idea of selling at a loss is betraying the next generation of patients who are going to require innovation. So it's important to really understand this link between sustainable innovation and profit making. Now, of course, what your question is more about the level of profit rather than just the profit making. And there, once the product is on the market, there is a whole set of participants into the value chain which need to be taken into account. Insurance companies, governments, paying systems, etc. We have introduced 2 systems. We do not enforce our patent in developing countries according to the United Nations classifications. And therefore we sell at cost into countries which are in that group. We have also transferred some technology at the end of the useful life of our patents. We will, for instance, the HIV drugs that we manufacture now in Egypt and in South Africa. These are factories that we've installed, but which are run by the local health system. We have also helped over the years in establishing private health systems in different countries in which we want patients to have access to our drugs. I don't know the case of Estonia in particular, but maybe you and I can talk about this later on. We are not in the business of trying to make it impossible for patients to get these drugs. We're in the business of making sure that these drugs are available. So we've been looking at a number of solutions. For instance, in the US, we have a number of patients who cannot afford these drugs. So Genentech has started a foundation which makes it more affordable for patients under certain qualifications to be able to get these drugs. So we're doing our bit, but we are not the only one to blame. There's a whole system around it that needs to be looked at.
Great. We just have time for 1 or 2 more. There's one over here I saw up front, up over here, and there's someone going over there. So get a mic up here. There you go. She's coming up. Is there any more? Okay, maybe this will be the last question.
Hi, good morning. Mr. Hoffmann, you said something that I thought was fascinating. Actually, it's so fascinating that I wrote it down. You said the ability to innovate is inversely related to the size of the organization. And I think you mean size, not valuation, because Uber has the same valuation today as General Motors, but certainly doesn't have the same size. So if you were to look into the future and speculate about the organization and the governance of the future organization that wants to remain innovative, what would be your rules of thumb, your guidelines? How would that organization look like?
Well, we started to sort of addressing that earlier on. I think you need to protect the scientists, in particular in the pharmaceutical industry. Yeah? I mean, you big research groups organized in a hierarchical manner with one boss and a lot of people running about. That's the model of the last century, perhaps even of the century before that. Today you need to have teams which are interactive and are constantly challenging each other, and preferably challenging each other across geographies, not only in the same lab. And the best way to do that is to give them the opportunity, the freedom to be able to do just this focus on innovation. So you need to separate them as much as possible from the sales pressure. But if you are starting to just do science for science, you might be missing the need of the market. So you need marketing to be involved at some stage. But in the future, I can see corporations being split into smaller research groups with a more indirect relationships. But also, I think that if we're looking across companies, these strict rules of intellectual property will have to start to be watered down somehow. They are already now by the free flow of information. I mean, a lot of these formulas cannot be protected anymore. So the idea of saying this is my development, I'm not sharing it, is a thing which I think is going to become obsolete soon. We need to be able to create a benefit to the patient by sharing innovation as much as possible. I mean, this, after all, you were talking about Uber, that's the success of Silicon Valley, open access. You can't go and drink a coffee in Palo Alto without somebody telling him what he's doing. It's just constantly happening, and that has helped to create value. And I think that's the unique characteristic of the Silicon Valley.
Wonderful. So André, and to everyone here, I think those who've certainly been with us for many years, we're very selective of who we invite to come and talk to you from the plenary stage. They're people who are not only great business leaders who we think are going to have infinite wisdom to share with you, but they're also people who have made a huge impact on society and who have a view that we think is really positive and good for overall well-being. And you and your family, André, really do personify that. So on behalf of all of us, thank you so much for what you're doing. Thank you for keeping us healthy and alive. And thank you for being with us today.
Thank you very much. Thanks.